The essay by Irfan Ahmad, Recognizing Hindu Orientalism, sounded very important to me. It allows us to go beyond the simplification of the vibrant democracy, the tolerant civilization, and it gives us a more realistic understanding of what's really going on around a concept of Hindu Orientalism, which is very fruitful and which goes beyond our understanding of India, which is a tool which can be applied to our knowledge of the rest of the planet. So,
this is a courageous and thoughtful article, from which I have learned much, both factually about the dominant political ideology in India, known as Hindutva, as well as theoretically about the necessity of thinking of decolonization in more complicated dialectical ways.
The essay by Irfan Ahmad, Recognizing Hindu Orientalism, sounded very important to me for at least two reasons. First, it allows us, social scientists, European or Americans, who have a very poor stereotype knowledge of India, it allows us to go beyond the simplification of the vibrant democracy, the tolerant civilization, and it gives us a more realistic understanding of what's really going on in terms of religious minorities in India. And maybe the second reason is that it's not only a description, but it brings us, it offers tools of analysis around a concept of Hindu Orientalism, which is very fruitful and which goes beyond our understanding of India, which is a tool which can be applied to our knowledge of the rest of the planet. So these are two real good reasons. Now, as a political scientist, I have studied diverse Muslim societies from Algeria to Yemen, mainly Arabs. And of course, I have closely observed the Muslim question in France. And reading Irfan Ahmad's essay brings to my mind two comparative points. The first might be to correlate with what Wa'il Halaq added in terms of critiques to the famous and still central contribution of Edward Said, Deconstruction of Orientalism, notably on what he labeled Israeli Orientalism, which might be fruitfully connected to the illuminating category of Hindu Orientalism constructed by Irfan Ahmad. And another fruitful comparative point, of course, would logically come to confront the historical and social root causes of Islamophobia, both in France and in India. It happens then in a piece titled The Double Extradition, Dr. Edward and Mr. Said, what Edward Said has to tell us 30 years on from Orientalism, published, if I am correct, by the Review of Middle East Studies, about Said's visit to his Egyptian childhood school, supposedly invaded by Muslims in his own terms. I have myself underlined this contradictory image of Islam that Said articulates which is in fact very close to that constructed about Middle East as a whole by this Orientalist school he has denounced in its entire work. To highly recommend it to all of our colleagues.
These are some comments on Irfan Ahmad's excellent article entitled Hindu Orientalism. What is decolonization? Much of the most interesting recent literature on this topic argues that it goes beyond the simple idea of political liberation, that is, beyond the achievement of political independence. On many points, this view overlaps with the theme of Orientalism that Edward Said dealt with in his famous book by that name, where he wrote about Western representations of and attitudes towards non-Western societies that were actually or potentially dominated by the West. Orientalism, therefore, referred to a crucial element in an aspect of modern imperialism. In his powerful essay, Hindu Orientalism, Irfan Ahmad argues that the notion of Orientalism can be extended to countries that are not themselves necessarily part of an imperial relationship. Sheldon Pollock, in his important essay entitled Deep Orientalism, analyzed the origin and growth of Indology in 19th century Germany, a country that did not have much of an empire in the non-European world, and yet that developed the idea that language and race were strongly connected, an idea that reinforced the development of an Orientalist perspective toward an internal population, especially the Jews. Ahmad seeks to go beyond Sheldon Pollock's idea of internal Orientalism, as well as beyond Wael Hallaq's criticism of Edward Said for theoretically failing to analyze the case of Israel-Palestine as an example of Orientalism, although he does, of course, mention that case. Ahmad is concerned to analyze the roots of Hindutva, the dominant political ideology in India today, as a form of Orientalism. The main conclusion is that Hindu Orientalism is, in his own words, a modern practice that is neither exclusively indigenous nor purely Western or British, but an outcome of interactions between the two over the longue durée, unquote. Thus, from the time that the British established themselves in India in the 18th century, British administrators and soldiers identified Indian Muslims not only as fundamentally foreign to India, but also as oppressive of and dominant over the so-called weak Hindus. The term weak is, of course, a British one. This encouraged the growth of the idea that Hinduism was, in terms of origin and character, authentic to India, whereas Islam was an intrusion. This idea, Ahmad points out, has also promoted the claim that the Aboriginal population in India, the peoples who lived in what later has come to be called India before the Aryan invasion that brought Hinduism into that country, should be regarded as Hindu, although their beliefs and their ways of life differ basically from that of caste Hindus. This is a courageous and thoughtful article from which I have learned much, both factually about the dominant political ideology in India, known as Hindutva, as well as theoretically about the necessity of thinking of decolonization in more complicated dialectical ways. In my view, this article should be very widely read.